One must learn to observe the mind without getting lost in it. This is the difference between those who live in suffering and those who live in peace. A person who understands their mind does not take every thought seriously. They see thoughts for what they are: temporary, fleeting, often unreliable. When fear arises, they do not immediately obey it. When doubt appears, they do not let it stop them. They have created a space between themselves and their mind, and in that space lies their freedom. But to create this space, one must first become aware. Most people live on autopilot, reacting to their thoughts and emotions without question. They assume that because a thought is in their mind, it must be important. They assume that because an emotion is felt, it must be acted upon. But neither of these assumptions is true. A thought is just a thought. An emotion is just an emotion. They are not commands. They do not have to be obeyed. They do not even have to be believed. A person who is trapped in their mind will suffer unnecessarily. They will relive past pain even when the moment has long passed. They will fear the future even when nothing bad is happening. They will create problems in their minds that do not exist in reality. But a person who sees the nature of the mind can step outside of this cycle. They can experience thoughts without becoming lost in them. They can feel emotions without being controlled by them. The mind, when left unobserved, becomes a source of suffering. But when observed, it loses its power. It is like a wild animal. If left unchecked, it will run in all directions, causing chaos. But if watched, if trained, it becomes calm, focused, and useful. The goal is not to fight the mind, not to silence it by force, but simply to see it clearly. When one sees their own thoughts clearly, they are no longer deceived by them. This is why self-awareness is so powerful. A person who is aware of their thoughts can choose which ones to entertain and which ones to ignore. They are not thrown around by every passing worry, every sudden impulse. They remain steady, centered, at peace. This does not mean they do not experience emotions. It simply means they do not become trapped by them. Imagine watching a storm through a window. The wind may be strong, the rain may be heavy, but inside you are safe. The storm does not shake you. This is what it means to observe the mind. Thoughts may come and go, emotions may rise and fall, but you are not those thoughts. You are the one watching. And when you watch without attachment, the mind loses its ability to control you. People who live unconsciously allow their minds to dictate their reality. If the mind tells them they are not good enough, they believe it. If the mind tells them they are going to fail, they accept it. But these are just thoughts, nothing more. And thoughts do not define reality unless they are given power. The only thing keeping a person trapped is their belief in their own mental chatter. The moment they stop believing in it, they become free. This is not a theory, it is an experience. If a person truly observes their mind, they will see that most of their suffering is self-created. The pain of the past is no longer real, yet they carry it. The fears of the future have not happened, yet they suffer over them. The mind is constantly creating problems where there are none. And yet the mind itself is not the enemy, it is only untrained. The moment a person stops identifying with their thoughts, their world changes. They no longer react compulsively. They no longer live in unnecessary fear. They no longer carry burdens that are not real. They gain clarity, peace, and true control over their life. The mind becomes a tool, something to be used rather than something that uses them. But to reach this state, one must practice awareness. They must watch the mind without getting lost in it. They must step back and see that thoughts come and go, but they do not have to be believed. A person who realizes this will find that most of their worries disappear. Most of their fears dissolve. Most of their suffering fades away. Because they finally understand that they are not their mind, they are something far greater. People go through life carrying an invisible burden, an endless stream of worries about things that have not even happened. The mind left unchecked is a master at creating fear out of nothing. It projects images of failure, of rejection, of disaster, and people believe them as if they are real. They become prisoners of imagined suffering, living in fear of a future that exists only in their thoughts. They do not realize that most of what they fear will never come to pass. They waste their present moments worrying about something that is not happening, and in doing so, they turn their own minds into a source of torment. Fear of the future is one of the greatest sources of suffering. People spend years of their lives anxious about what might happen, only to realize later that most of those fears were unnecessary. They hesitate before making decisions, afraid of making mistakes. They avoid taking risks, afraid of failure. They hold back from fully experiencing life, afraid of what others might think. But in this hesitation, in this avoidance, they are not protecting themselves, they are imprisoning themselves. The future is uncertain, yes, but it has always been uncertain. No amount of worrying will change that. The mind thrives on control, and when it cannot control what will happen, it turns to fear. It invents worst-case scenarios, convinces people that danger is around every corner, and traps them in a cycle of endless overthinking. But one must ask, how many times has fear ever truly helped? Has worrying about tomorrow ever changed what will happen? Has imagining the worst ever prevented it from occurring? Or has it only stolen today's peace? Fear is an illusion, a shadow cast by the mind. It is a story, a prediction that has no substance. Most of what people fear is not based on reality but on assumptions. They assume things will go wrong. They assume they will fail. They assume they will not be able to handle what comes their way. But how many times has reality actually matched the fears created by the mind? How many times have the imagined disasters truly come to pass? More often than not, life unfolds in ways that were never predicted. Problems arise, yes, but so do solutions. Challenges appear, but so does strength. People forget that they have always survived every difficulty they have faced. Every obstacle, every hardship, every unexpected turn, somehow they have made it through. They have adapted, learned, and grown. And yet, despite this proof, they continue to doubt themselves. They continue to fear what is ahead, forgetting that they have the capacity to handle whatever comes. The mind tells them they are not ready, that they are not strong enough, that they are not capable, but the truth is, they have always been capable. They simply do not trust themselves. Trust is what dissolves fear. A person who trusts themselves does not waste time worrying about the future. They know that no matter what happens, they will find a way through. They do not need certainty because they have confidence in their own ability to navigate the unknown. But trust cannot exist where there is overthinking. A person who constantly analyzes every possibility, who constantly doubts their own strength, will never find peace. They will be stuck in an endless loop of fear, always looking for guarantees, always trying to predict the unpredictable. Most people do not fear the future itself, they fear their own inability to handle it. They believe they are not strong enough, not wise enough, not prepared enough, but this is never true. Strength does not come from knowing what will happen. It comes from knowing that whatever happens, they will respond. And this response does not come from fear, it comes from presence, from clarity, from trust. The future is like a vast ocean. Some people stand on the shore, afraid to enter because they do not know how deep the water is. They hesitate, trying to calculate every wave, trying to predict the movements of the sea. But the ocean cannot be controlled. It cannot be measured with certainty. The only way to truly experience it is to step in, to trust that they will float, to trust that they will swim. Life is the same. No one knows exactly what will happen. But waiting for certainty means waiting forever. A person who allows fear to dictate their life will never fully live. They will always be waiting for the right moment, for the perfect plan, for guarantees that do not exist. But life does not wait. Opportunities come and go, time moves forward, and the person who hesitates out of fear loses the very experiences they were afraid of missing. There is no perfect time. There is no moment when everything will feel completely safe. There is only now and the choice to step forward despite uncertainty. Fear makes everything appear more difficult than it truly is. It magnifies obstacles, making them seem insurmountable. It distorts perception, making people believe they are weaker than they really are. But when fear is set aside, when a person moves forward despite it, they realize that most of their limitations existed only in their minds. The challenges they feared so much turn out to be manageable. The things they believed they could not handle turn out to be within their capability. There is freedom in realizing that fear does not have to be obeyed. It will arise, yes, but it does not have to control one's actions. A person can feel fear and still move forward. They can acknowledge uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. The presence of fear does not mean something is wrong, it simply means something is unknown. And the unknown is not necessarily dangerous, it is simply unfamiliar. When a child learns to walk, they do not stop because they fear falling. They stumble, they fall, but they get up again. They do not analyze every step. They do not hesitate for months before trying. They simply move, they simply learn. But as people grow older, they lose this natural trust. They become too cautious, too hesitant. They let their minds create endless reasons why they should wait, why they should hold back. But waiting does not remove fear, it only strengthens it. The longer one waits, the harder it becomes to move. The only way to overcome fear of the future is to face it. To step into it without guarantees, to trust in one's ability to adapt, to embrace the uncertainty as part of the experience. The future is not something to fear, it is something to be lived. It is not an enemy, it is an open space of possibility. But this can only be seen when one stops looking at it through the lens of fear. The mind will always try to create scenarios, to invent problems, to hold a person back with thoughts of doubt and worry. But thoughts are not reality. Fear is not reality. The only reality is what is happening now, in this moment. The future will come as it comes, and when it does, a person will meet it not with fear, but with the strength they have always had within them. The mind will always try to weave illusions of fear, doubt, and hesitation, but the truth remains unchanged. Life is happening now. The past is gone, the future is yet to come, and the only thing that truly exists is this moment. Freedom is not found in controlling every outcome nor in clinging to what has already passed. It is found in the willingness to let go, to trust, and to step forward despite uncertainty. You are not a prisoner of your mind unless you choose to be. The doors have always been open. The chains are only thoughts, nothing more. The moment you stop feeding them, the moment you stop believing in the limitations your mind creates, you will realize something powerful. You were never truly trapped. You were always free. The mind is a continuous stream of thoughts, an endless flow of images, words, emotions, and memories. Every second it generates thoughts, some useful, some useless, some positive, some negative. The mistake most people make is that they believe every thought that arises. They do not realize that thoughts that they have absolute truths, they are simply passing clouds in the sky of the mind. Yet, instead of letting them drift by, they grab onto them, identify with them, and allow them to dictate their emotions and actions. This is where the suffering begins. A thought arises, perhaps one of doubt, perhaps I am not good enough. Instead of seeing it as just another passing thought, the person believes it. They reinforce it. They allow it to shape their perception of themselves. They do not question it, they do not challenge it, they simply accept it as truth. And from that single thought, an entire chain of suffering is created. Because they believe they are not good enough, They hesitate to take action. Because they hesitate, they miss opportunities. Because they miss opportunities, they feel like a failure. And the cycle repeats. But where did it all begin? With a single thought that was never questioned. Thoughts are not reality. They are not commands. They are not the voice of ultimate truth. They are simply mental activity, just like a beating heart or breathing lungs. But people treat their thoughts as if they are undeniable facts. If a negative thought appears, they believe it. If fear arises, they assume it must mean something terrible is about to happen. If doubt creeps in, they take it as a sign that they should stop. They do not realize that thoughts come and go, that they do not have to act upon them, and that most of them have no real power unless they are given attention. The mind is a storyteller. It takes past experiences, emotions, and beliefs and weaves them into narratives. It tells a person who they are, what they can and cannot do, what is possible and impossible. But these stories are not always true. They are shaped by past conditioning, by fears, by insecurities. A person who has failed once may carry the thought, "I always fail," even though it is not true. A person who was rejected once may believe, "I am unlovable," even though it is just a story the mind has created. And these stories, once believed, shape the course of a person's life. If you observe the mind closely, you will see that it is not under control. It jumps from one thought to another without pause. It replays the past, imagines the future, creates worries, doubts, and fears. Most people do not think, they are simply being thought. They are not choosing their thoughts, they are being dragged along by them. If a negative thought arises, they are pulled into its spiral. If fear appears, they are consumed by it. They do not realize that they have the power to step back and observe rather than react. Imagine sitting on the bank of a river, watching the water flow. The river does not stop. It carries leaves, sticks, and debris along its current. Some parts of the river are calm, others are rough. But as the observer, you do not jump into the river, you simply watch. This is how one must treat thoughts. They come and go, some pleasant, some unpleasant, but none of them are you. None of them have the power to control you unless you jump in and get swept away. The problem is not that the mind generates negative thoughts, it always will. The problem is that people attach themselves to these thoughts, give them energy, and allow them to dictate their lives. A single thought of fear can stop a person from taking action. A single thought of doubt can convince someone to give up. But if the thought is seen for what it is, just a passing mental event, it loses its power. When a person does not identify with their thoughts, they gain true freedom. They no longer have to be at the mercy of every emotion, every fear, every worry that arises. They can observe them, acknowledge them, and let them pass without being controlled by them. They can choose which thoughts to give energy to and which to ignore. They can take charge of their inner world instead of being a victim of it. The mistake is in thinking that every thought deserves attention. Just because the mind says something does not make it important. If a stranger on the street shouted, "You will fail," would you stop and believe them? Would you let their words control your life? Then why do the same with the mind? It is just another voice, another passing noise. It does not always tell the truth. It is simply producing content, just as the heart beats and the lungs breathe. The mind is a powerful tool, but it is only a tool. When used correctly, it can help solve problems, create ideas, and navigate life. But when it is allowed to run unchecked, it creates unnecessary suffering. It tells stories of fear, regret, limitation, and inadequacy. It keeps a person trapped in a cycle of overthinking, anxiety, and self-doubt. But none of this is real. The only thing that gives these thoughts power is the belief that they must be obeyed. A person who understands the nature of the mind does not take thoughts too seriously. They do not get trapped in every worry, every fear, every doubt that arises, they know that thoughts are just passing waves in the ocean of consciousness. They come and they go, but they do not define reality. They do not define who you are. Most suffering comes not from life itself, but from the mind's interpretation of life. The mind sees an event and labels it as terrible. It takes a challenge and turns it into a disaster. It creates meaning where there is none, and in doing so creates suffering. But the truth is, the world simply is. Situations happen. People come and go. Circumstances change. The suffering arises not from these things, but from the mind's reaction to them. Change the reaction, and the suffering disappears. People spend their lives trying to change the outside world, hoping that they can fix their circumstances, they will finally be happy. But the real work is within. If the mind is not trained, no amount of external success will bring peace. A person with an untrained mind will always find something to worry about, something to regret, something to fear. But a person who understands the nature of thoughts can remain at peace no matter what happens around them. The greatest power a person can have is the ability to observe their own mind without being controlled by it, to step back and see thoughts as they are just thoughts, not reality, to choose which thoughts to entertain and which to let go. This is true freedom, not freedom from life's challenges, but freedom from the unnecessary suffering created by the mind. The mind is an incredible instrument capable of envisioning the vastest possibilities and the greatest dreams. Yet, for most people, this same mind becomes the biggest obstacle. Instead of being a source of inspiration, it becomes a source of limitation. Instead of expanding a person's potential, it traps them in narrow thinking, repetitive doubts, and unnecessary fears. The mind has the power to create both freedom and bondage. The question is, how is it being used? Most people are not aware that their thoughts and beliefs are shaping their lives every single day. They assume that the way they think is simply the way things are. They do not realize that their mind has been conditioned by experiences, by society, by education, by past failures and successes. Every person walks around with an invisible cage built by their own beliefs about what is possible and what is not. This cage is not real, but it feels real. It feels like a boundary that cannot be crossed. But in truth, the mind itself is the only thing keeping a person small. What you believe becomes your reality. If a person believes they are not talented, they will never put in the effort to discover their abilities. If a person believes they are destined to struggle, they will reject opportunities that could change their life. If a person believes they are incapable, they will not take the risks necessary to grow. These beliefs are not facts, they are simply thoughts that have been repeated so many times that they have become the foundation of a person's identity. But if a belief can be created, it can also be destroyed. If a limitation can be built, it can also be removed. The problem is that most people do not question their limitations. They do not ask where these ideas came from, or whether they are even true. They simply accept them and live accordingly. A child may hear from a teacher that they are not intelligent, and for the rest of their life, they carry that belief. A person may fail once at something, and instead of seeing it as a learning experience, they assume they are incapable. These small, seemingly insignificant thoughts accumulate over time, and soon they form an invisible prison. This is why two people can have the same potential, the same opportunities, yet one succeeds while the other remains stuck. The difference is not in intelligence, talent, or luck. The difference is in the mind. One person believes in possibilities while the other believes in limitations. One sees failure as a stepping stone while the other sees it as a confirmation of their worst fears. One trusts in their ability to grow while the other assumes they are already defined by their past. The mind, when left untrained, becomes a person's greatest enemy. But when mastered, it becomes their greatest ally. The key is understanding that every thought, every belief, every limitation exists only in the mind. They are not real. They feel real because they have been reinforced over time, but they are nothing more than mental constructs. The moment a person realizes this, they begin to see that they are not actually trapped. The walls around them are not made of stone, they are made of thought. And thought can be changed. A person who feels unworthy must ask themselves, where did this idea come from? A person who believes they cannot succeed must ask, who told me this? Most of the time, these limitations are inherited from the outside world. They come from parents, teachers, past experiences, and society. They are not the truth, they are simply ideas that have been absorbed. But the moment a person begins questioning these ideas, the illusion begins to break. They start to see that they are not actually incapable, they are not actually unworthy, they are not actually limited. They have simply been believing a false story. The mind is like a mirror. If it is covered in dust, it cannot reflect reality clearly. The dust is the accumulation of false beliefs, fears, and doubts that have been collected over a lifetime. But if the dust is cleared, the mind begins to see things as they really are. It sees that there are no real barriers. It sees that limitations exist only as long as they are believed. And in that moment, freedom begins. But breaking free from the mind's limitations does not happen overnight. It requires conscious effort. It requires watching one's own thoughts, questioning them, and replacing them with new ones. It requires understanding that just because a thought arises does not mean it is true. It requires recognizing that the mind has been shaped by the past, but the past does not have to dictate the future. A person who understands this begins to live differently. They no longer take their fears so seriously. They no longer allow past failures to define them. They no longer let old beliefs shape what they think is possible. Instead of assuming limitations, they begin to test them. Instead of staying within the cage of their old thinking, they begin to push beyond it. They take action even when doubt arises. They move forward even when fear tries to hold them back. They no longer wait for their mind to give them permission. They take control and decide what is possible for themselves. Most people wait for confidence before taking action. They wait until they feel ready, until their doubts disappear, until they feel sure. But this is a mistake. Confidence does not come first, action does. A person must step forward even with fear in their mind, even with doubt in their heart. The mind will always resist growth, because growth is uncertain, and the mind craves certainty. But if a person listens to this resistance, they will stay stuck forever. They must act in spite of it. They must move forward even when their thoughts tell them not to. They must understand that fear, doubt, and insecurity do not mean they are incapable. They simply mean they are stepping beyond their comfort zone. Every great achievement, every success, every breakthrough has come from someone who refused to be limited by their own mind. They felt fear, but they did not let it stop them. They faced doubt, but they did not let it hold them back. They saw their own limitations and decided to challenge them rather than obey them. This is what separates those who live fully from those who remain trapped. It is not intelligence, not talent, not luck. It is simply the ability to see beyond the illusions of the mind. A person who understands this no longer sees failure as an endpoint. They no longer allow setbacks to define them. They no longer let their past dictate their future. They recognize that the only thing truly holding them back is their own thinking. And the moment they stop believing in their limitations, they realize they never truly existed. The cage was never real. The prison was never locked. It was always just the mind, creating barriers that were never really there. The mind is constantly in motion. It jumps from one thought to another, from one worry to the next, from past regrets to future anxieties. It is rarely still, rarely at peace. People do not realize that they are not in control of their own minds, rather their minds control them. They are pulled in different directions by emotions, by reactions, by compulsions they do not even understand. The mind whispers fears and they listen. It brings up past pain and they relive it. It creates imaginary obstacles and they believe in them. Instead of using the mind as a tool, they have become enslaved by it. The mistake people make is thinking that every thought that arises must be engaged with. They believe that if the mind produces fear, that fear must be real. If the mind brings up a memory, that memory must define who they are. But this is not true. The mind is simply a machine, generating thoughts automatically. Some thoughts are helpful, but many are not. The problem is not the presence of thoughts, the problem is identifying with them. Imagine sitting in a room with a television playing in the background. The television shows all kinds of programs, some pleasant, some disturbing, some irrelevant. If you are deeply absorbed in the television, you will react to everything it shows. If it shows something scary, you will feel fear. If it plays something sad, you will feel sorrow. But if you realize that it is just a screen, just a broadcast, you can step back and watch without being emotionally controlled by it. This is exactly how the mind works. Thoughts appear, images come and go, but none of them have the power to control you unless you give them that power. Most people have never learned to watch their minds. They are too deeply entangled in their own thoughts to see them clearly. If a fear arises, they become the fear. If anger arises, they become the anger. If a thought of self-doubt appears, they accept it as truth. They do not realize that these are just passing phenomena like clouds drifting across the sky. A cloud does not define the sky. Similarly, a thought does not define a person. The problem is attachment. People do not just experience thoughts, they cling to them. If a negative memory surfaces, instead of letting it pass, they analyze it, replay it, relive it. If the mind generates a fearful scenario about the future, instead of dismissing it, they take it seriously, as if it were a prophecy. They suffer over things that have not even happened, things that may never happen. They allow the mind to dictate their emotions, their actions, their entire state of being. But this is unnecessary. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a prison more confining than any steel bars or concrete walls. A prison where the jailer and the prisoner are the same person, you. It is the prison of your own mind. You see, the mind is a powerful tool, but for most people it is not a tool they use, it is a tormentor they suffer. Your thoughts, your fears, your doubts, they do not need chains to hold you down. They whisper, they linger, they shape your reality until you start believing you are stuck, that you are not enough, that you cannot change. But let me tell you something, this prison is not real. The walls, they are made of fear. The bars, they are built from past regrets. And the lock, it is your own unwillingness to let go. Who is stopping you from living fully? Who is keeping you from peace, from joy, from possibility? Nobody except the stories you keep telling yourself. The problem is not that life is hard, the problem is that you think too much about life being hard. The problem is not that people don't believe in you, the problem is you don't believe in yourself. If you are tired, if you are struggling, ask yourself, am I suffering from the world or am I suffering from my own thoughts? The mind is the most powerful force in human existence. It has the ability to create, to imagine, to build, and to transform. Every great invention, every masterpiece, every scientific breakthrough, and every extraordinary achievement began as a single thought in someone's mind. Yet this same mind that has the power to create also has the power to destroy. It can become a tool for liberation or a weapon of self-destruction. The difference lies in whether you control your mind or allow it to control you. Most people live their entire lives as prisoners of their own thoughts. They wake up every day with the same cycle of worries, the same fears, the same doubts, and the same limitations. Their mind runs in endless loops, repeating negative patterns, reinforcing insecurities, and keeping them trapped in their own self-created reality. They do not see that the prison they feel trapped in does not actually exist anywhere except in their own perception. The mind can create imaginary walls that feel just as real as physical barriers. When you believe that you cannot do something, that belief itself becomes the chain that holds you down. It is not the world that stops most people from living fully. It is not their circumstances, their past, or their external limitations. It is their own inner dialogue, the constant mental chatter, the self-doubt, the overthinking. It all adds up to a life that feels confined, restricted, and smaller than it actually is. People think they are trapped by their situation, but more often than not, they are trapped by their thoughts about their situation. Imagine a bird that has been kept in a cage for years. One day the door is opened, but the bird does not fly away. It has been conditioned to believe that it is still trapped. Even though freedom is right in front of it, the bird remains inside because it no longer believes in the possibility of escape. This is what happens to people who have spent years living in fear, doubt, and self-imposed limitations. Even when life presents them with opportunities, they hesitate. They do not step forward because their mind has convinced them that they are still trapped. Words are not reality, but they shape reality. A person who believes they are unworthy will act as if they are unworthy. A person who believes they are not good enough will hesitate to take risks, will avoid challenges, and will never step into their full potential. These beliefs may not be true, but if they are accepted as truth, they become the foundation upon which life is built. And a foundation built on fear and doubt can only create a life that is small, uncertain, and unfulfilled. The mind can either be a source of power or a source of suffering. When you control your mind, it works for you. It becomes a tool that helps you think clearly, make wise decisions, and move forward with strength. But when the mind controls you, it becomes a prison. It fills your days with endless worries about things that may never happen. It keeps you attached to painful memories of the past. It convinces you that you are not capable, not deserving, not enough. And if you do not see this, you will spend your life held back by invisible chains, wondering why happiness and success seem just out of reach. Most people do not realize that they have the power to choose their thoughts. They assume that if a thought appears in their mind, it must be true. If fear arises, they assume it is a warning. If doubt appears, they assume it is a sign to stop. But thoughts are not instructions, they are just passing clouds in the vast sky of the mind. You can watch them, observe them, and let them go. Just because a thought appears does not mean you have to believe it. Just because your mind tells you something does not mean it is true. A person who masters their mind is free, no matter what their external circumstances are. They do not let fear dictate their actions. They do not let doubt stop them from moving forward. They do not allow negative thoughts to shape their identity. They understand that the mind is a tool, and like any tool, it must be used correctly. If you allow a knife to control you, it can be dangerous, but if you know how to use it, it becomes a valuable instrument. The same is true for the mind. Training the mind requires awareness. It requires stepping back and observing your thoughts rather than reacting to them automatically. It requires questioning the beliefs you have carried for years. It requires asking yourself whether the stories you tell yourself are helping you grow or keeping you small. Most people never take the time to do this. They accept whatever their mind tells them without question. They let past experiences dictate their future. They let childhood conditioning shape their adult reality. They do not realize that they have the power to break free at any moment simply by changing the way they think. You can either be ruled by your mind or you can rule it. You can either live at the mercy of your thoughts or you can use them as a tool to shape your reality. The choice is always yours. No one else is holding you back. No external force is stopping you from breaking free. The only thing that stands between you and the life you want to live is your own mind. And the moment you realize this, the prison begins to disappear. Suffering is a strange thing. People assume it comes from the outside, that it is caused by events, situations, or other people. But if that were true, then the same situation would cause the same suffering for everyone. Yet, that is not the case. Two people can go through the exact same experience. Yet one remains calm while the other is shattered. The difference is not in what happened, but in how the mind processes it. Most suffering is not caused by the world, it is self-created through thought, through interpretation, through the stories the mind tells over and over again. The mind has a way of magnifying pain, of stretching a single moment of discomfort into a lifetime of misery. Something happens, a rejection, a failure, a betrayal, and instead of letting it pass like a storm, the mind holds on to it. It replays the memory again and again like a broken record. Every time it is remembered, the pain is felt once more. What was once a single moment of suffering turns into months, even years of mental torment. It is not the event itself that causes prolonged suffering, but the unwillingness to let go. People think suffering comes from their circumstances, but more often than not, it comes from resistance. Life does not always go according to plan. Challenges arise, people come and go, situations change. Yet, instead of accepting what is, the mind resists. It fights against reality, saying, this should not have happened, it was not supposed to be this way, I cannot handle this. And in that resistance, suffering takes root. Pain is natural, but suffering is a choice. Pain is what happens in the moment, suffering is what happens in the mind long after the moment has passed. The mind is a master of illusion. It creates worries about things that have not happened yet. It builds entire stories of disaster and failure before anything has even occurred. A simple thought like, what if I fail, can turn into hours of mental distress, imagining the worst possible outcomes. But none of it is real. The suffering is not coming from reality, it is coming from a mind that refuses to rest. Fear, too, is a creation of the mind. People suffer not because something bad is happening right now, but because they are afraid of what might happen in the future. A person who is financially stable today may still suffer intense anxiety about money, not because they lack anything now, but because their mind is constantly projecting into an uncertain future. They imagine losses, struggles, and failures that may never come. In reality, they are safe, but in their mind they are already experiencing hardship. And because the body does not know the difference between what is real and what is imagined, the suffering feels just as real as if it were actually happening. The same happens with regret. The past is gone, it no longer exists. Yet, the mind keeps bringing it back, making a person relive their mistakes, their missed opportunities, their failures. If something happened 10 years ago, the suffering should have lasted only for that moment. But the mind does not let it rest. It keeps bringing the past into the present, making a person suffer today for something that no longer exists anywhere except in memory. If suffering were truly caused by external events, then everyone who goes through the same experience would suffer equally. But that is not the case. Some people lose everything and still find peace. Others have everything yet feel miserable. Some people face rejection and move on, while others let it define them for the rest of their lives. The suffering is not in the event, it is in the meaning that the mind attaches to it. People believe that if they change their circumstances, they will stop suffering. They think that if they find success, love, wealth, or recognition, their suffering will end. But suffering does not come from the outside, it comes from within. A person who has an undisciplined mind will suffer no matter where they are or what they have. They will always find something to worry about, something to regret, something to be anxious over. But a person who understands the nature of the mind, who sees through its tricks, can be at peace even in the most difficult situations. The truth is, suffering is largely a habit. The mind has been trained over years to react in certain ways. If, from childhood, a person has learned to overthink, to dwell on problems, to expect the worst, then that pattern will continue into adulthood. They will suffer not because of what happens, but because of how their mind has been conditioned to respond. But just as a habit can be formed, it can also be unlearned. The first step is awareness. Most people suffer unconsciously. They do not realize that they are the ones feeding their own suffering. They believe their thoughts without question, without realizing that they can step back and observe those thoughts instead of becoming trapped in them. The moment a person becomes aware of how the mind creates suffering, they gain the power to change it. The mind will always think that is its nature, but not every thought needs to be believed. Not every fear needs to be entertained. Not every regret needs to be held on to. The moment a person realizes that they are not their thoughts, that they are the observer of the mind, suffering begins to lose its power. The mind will still create worries, doubts, and fears, but they will no longer have the same hold. Instead of drowning in them, a person can simply watch them come and go, just like waves in the ocean. The world will never be perfect. People will disappoint you. Plans will fail. Loss will happen. But none of these things have the power to cause suffering unless the mind turns them into suffering. Reality is simply what it is, neither good nor bad. It is the mind that labels events as terrible, as unbearable, as unfair. But these are just interpretations, not truth. Change the interpretation and suffering dissolves. A person who understands this no longer waits for the world to change in order to be happy. They do not rely on others to act a certain way, on circumstances to be ideal, or on life to go according to plan. They take responsibility for their own mind. They understand that suffering is not something that happens to them, it is something they create, and therefore something they can let go of.